191 days in the trenches, not a single man captured, and their own country refused to let them march. In this episode of Untold Stories, we travel from the starvation and despair of the siege of Kut to something perhaps even more painful: betrayal not by an enemy, but by the nation you swore to defend. This is the story of the Harlem Hellfighters, the 369th Infantry Regiment in World War I, black soldiers who became France's most decorated American unit, earned the Croix de Guerre for extraordinary valor, and returned home to a country that still considered them less than equal. World War I segregation didn't just shape their service, it defined their entire existence. It began on the streets of Harlem. When the United States entered the Great War in April 1917, thousands of African American men volunteered, believing that proving their courage on the battlefield might finally earn them the rights they'd been denied at home. Among them were porters, musicians, laborers, and college students, men who had spent their lives navigating a nation that segregated their schools, their churches, even their drinking fountains. Now they were told to pick up a rifle and fight for democracy abroad. But here's the cruel twist. The American military didn't want them. The 369th Infantry Regiment was formed in New York, composed almost entirely of African American enlisted men with both black and white officers. They trained at Camp Wadsworth in Spartanburg, South Carolina, a town so hostile to black soldiers that local white residents threatened violence if they saw them on the streets. The men of the 369th were ordered to avoid confrontation, to swallow their pride, to accept humiliation in a country they were preparing to die for. And when they finally shipped out to France in late 1917, the United States Army had a problem. White American divisions refused to serve alongside black troops. Commanders didn't want them. Logistics officers shuffled paperwork to avoid integrating them into any fighting force. So the American Expeditionary Force, under General John Pershing, made a decision that would accidentally change history. They gave the 369th to the French. The French Fourth Army welcomed the Harlem Hellfighters with open arms, not out of pure altruism, but out of desperate need. France had been bleeding for 3 years. They needed every soldier they could get. The men of the 369th were issued French helmets, French weapons, French rations. They were integrated into French command structures. And for the first time in their military lives, they were treated simply as soldiers. Think about that for a moment. An ocean away from home, fighting under a foreign flag, these men finally found something approaching equality in a war zone. If stories like this grip you the way they grip me, consider subscribing. We uncover a new one every week. The 369th entered the trenches in the Argonne Forest region, and they did not leave for 191 consecutive days. No other American unit, white or black, spent that long in continuous combat during the entire war. They fought through gas attacks, artillery barrages, and brutal hand-to-hand combat in the mud and darkness of no man's land. And it was during one of those dark nights that 2 men became legends. May 14th, 1918. A German raiding party of at least 24 soldiers crept toward a forward observation post manned by Private Henry Johnson and Private Needham Roberts. Both men were on watch. Both were armed with French rifles, a few grenades, and a bolo knife. The Germans opened fire. Roberts was hit almost immediately, wounded so badly he couldn't stand. Johnson took multiple wounds himself. Estimates suggest he was hit at least 21 times during the engagement. But he didn't retreat. He didn't surrender. When his rifle jammed, Henry Johnson used it as a club. When that wasn't enough, he drew his bolo knife and charged directly into the raiding party. He killed at least 4 German soldiers and wounded perhaps 30 more, single-handedly driving back the entire raid and preventing the capture of Needham Roberts. The French military was astonished. Henry Johnson became the first American of any race to receive the Croix de Guerre with Star and Gold Palm in World War I. The French called him Black Death. Needham Roberts received the Croix de Guerre as well. Their story made international headlines. But here is the detail that should haunt you. The United States Army did not award Henry Johnson the Medal of Honor. Not then. Not for decades. It would take until the year 2015, 97 years after that night in the Argonne, for the United States to finally recognize his extraordinary bravery with its highest military honor. He was dead by then. He'd been dead since 1929, broken by his wounds, impoverished, and largely forgotten. The 369th Infantry Regiment fought in some of the war's most critical engagements: Meuse-Argonne, Château-Thierry, Belleau Woods surrounding operations. The entire regiment was awarded the Croix de Guerre by the French government. 171 individual members received the French Legion of Merit, or the Croix de Guerre, for personal acts of valor. They suffered over 1,500 casualties. They never lost a foot of ground. They never had a man taken prisoner. They were, by virtually every measure, among the finest combat units of the entire war. And how did America respond? In August 1918, while the Hellfighters were still fighting and dying in France, the American military command issued a secret memorandum to the French. It was titled, Secret Information Concerning Black American Troops. The document urged French officers not to eat with black soldiers, not to shake their hands, not to praise them too highly, and not to allow them to interact with French women. The memo warned that treating black Americans as equals would create problems when they returned to the United States. The French largely ignored the memo, but its existence reveals something devastating about the nation these men were fighting for. Even in their finest hour, the machinery of segregation was working to diminish them. February 17, 1919. The 369th Infantry Regiment sailed into New York Harbor. The people of Harlem organized what white officials would not: a victory parade. The Hellfighters marched up Fifth Avenue and into Harlem, led by their legendary band under the direction of Lieutenant James Reese Europe, a musician who had helped introduce jazz rhythms to France and transform the sound of an entire continent. Thousands cheered. Families wept. For a few blocks, for a few hours, the Hellfighters received the recognition they deserved. And then it ended. The men returned to a nation gripped by the Red Summer of 1919, a wave of racial violence that swept across American cities. Black veterans were specifically targeted. Some were lynched while still wearing their uniforms. Henry Johnson, the hero of the Argonne, could not hold a steady job because of his injuries. He received no disability benefits. He died at 32 in poverty and obscurity. James Reese Europe, the band leader who had charmed all of France, was stabbed to death by a fellow musician just months after returning home. He was 39. The Harlem Hellfighters proved everything and were given nothing. They fought longer, bled more, and asked for less than almost any unit in the American Expeditionary Force. France honored them. History, for decades, forgot them. But here is what matters now. We remember. And the next time someone tells you the story of World War I, ask them. Ask them about the men who fought for a country that wouldn't fight for them. Subscribe. We uncover a forgotten story from World War I every single day. And next time, we go deeper into the French army itself, because in 1917, 30,000 French soldiers simply refused to fight. The mutiny that nearly lost the war. That story is coming next.